Welcome to episode 9 everyone, and this is where we learn how aggregation and window functions work. Now the aim of this episode is to introduce you to aggregation and window functions so that you get an understanding about what those are, how they work, and how you can use them in your SQL code moving forwards. First part, we'll be looking at the aggregation functions, some of which we've already touched in queries before this episode. Part 2, we'll have an introduction to window functions, and then part 3 we'll cover some more common window functions. Part 4, the last part of the episode, we'll be looking at some additional window functions that are not commonly used, however they can be useful in certain situations. So let's head on in to SQL Server Management Studio. Right then, let's change our database, shall we? There we go, into Wide World Importers. Right then, so aggregate functions, what are they all about then? Well, an aggregate function basically allows you to group a set of data together and have a look, apply a variety of different mathematical functions in order to do some sort of analysis on the data itself. Now, one key thing to note, to always be aware of, is what's known as scope, and that scope is what group of data you're actually looking at. So if we look at our very first aggregate functions here, the min and the max, all we're doing here with this function is pulling the maximum order date, and then with the min we're pulling the minimum order date from our sales orders table. Pretty much very simple, straightforward. So if we look at this first query here with no where clause, our scope is basically the entire column order date of this table here. So that's the scope we're looking at. And if we execute that, you'll see that the maximum order date in the entire table in that column is 31st of May 2016, and the minimum order date is the 1st of Jan 2013. Now if we put in a where clause where we only want to look at where the order date is 2016, we've suddenly changed our scope. So we're not looking in the entire column, we're actually looking in the column where the order date is 2016. That, should I say, the year of the order date is 2016. So now if we execute that, we of course get the same maximum order date, but you see the minimum order date is the 1st of Jan 2016. So we're changing the scope to suit what we want to return. Now with min and max, because they're aggregate functions, you'll need to put in a group by clause if you have any columns that aren't within an aggregate function. So here you can see we've got max on one column, min on another, but no other columns, so we don't need a group by clause because the scope is to pull it from the entire column itself. The where clause will restrict that scope down a bit, but we don't need to group by within this. Now, looking at the next very common SQL statement, select statement that we've done many times in the past, we are now going to bring in the customer ID. So we're changing the scope once again. Still got the year of the order date being in 2016, however we're now throwing in the customer ID. So we want everything per the customer ID. So we want the maximum quantity from the order lines table and the minimum quantity from the order lines table as well. We're making sure that we just want it where the order date was in 2016. So we put in our where clause there, similar to what we've got up here. And we now want to see per customer ID. So that's the scope we're working on, 2016, and break it down by the customer ID. So when we have a customer ID, there's no aggregate function on that customer ID column, so we need to put it in the group by clause there. I'm just going to order it as well so we can see the results on that. And if we execute that, you can see that for every single order line, because that's where we're pulling the quantity from, for our customer, the maximum quantity of all the order lines was 125 and the minimum was 1. And then we move to the next customer, got 156 and 1, and so on down the list, looking at all of our 663 customers. You can see the maximum and the minimum quantity was very small. So in 2016, for customer 1, out of all the order lines, the maximum quantity was 125 and the minimum quantity was 1. Now it doesn't matter how many order lines had a quantity of 125, that was the maximum, so it's pulling that, and the same with the minimum. Now what if we wanted to bring in even more groups into that? So for example, we want to find out the minimum and the maximum ordered quantities grouped by customer and per order ID as well. Well, we just simply bring in that as a column too. But of course, once we bring it in, because it hasn't got an aggregate function attached to it, we then need to bring it into our group by as well, simply separated by a comma there. I'm going to then order it by customer ID and order ID, and then let's see what we get when we run that. There's our order ID, and there's the max quantity. So for customer number 1 and for the specific order ID, the maximum quantity from all the order lines on that order ID was 84 and the minimum was 3, and so on down the list for that customer. Now if we have a look, if I can bring that up, if we look at customer number 1's data, we can see the maximum was 125 and the minimum was 1, which is what we saw for customer 1 when we were just grouping on the customer itself. So it could have picked any of these ones, but 125 was the largest amount. So when grouped by just the customer ID, it pulled 125 and 1 as the maximum and the minimum. However, when we brought the order ID into play, you can see we had different value, different minimum and maximum quantities being ordered on the order lines there. So you can keep on bringing in other things to group by, other columns, just as long as you make sure you put the same thing in the group by clause there. As long as it doesn't have an aggregate function attached to it, you need to put it in your group by clause. Now, what if you needed to put 2 levels of group by within the same query? So for example, you wanted to show this here, but at the end of each row you also wanted to show the maximum and the minimum quantity for each customer ID. Well, what we'd normally do, one of the quickest and easiest way to do that, is to simply put the same thing, same query, as either a subselect or as a CTE, and then join it in. So what we'll say is we'll build up our CTE quickly. All we're doing is we're selecting the same code there, minus the order ID, because we didn't need to bring that one in. And of course we don't need to order by within our sub-select. Let's move those along, get them in line so we can see what's going on. So here we've reverted back to our original bit of code. Execute there, where we saw it's not sorted, but we saw we had a maximum and a minimum for each customer ID there. So that's known as customer. So then all we need to do then is simply inner join customer as C. Let's neaten that up nicely. We've got a C, yep, we have indeed, so we'll use U instead. Customer ID equals C dot customer ID. This is a really quick and easy way to do this. Let's just copy those down, change those to U. Max quantity, we'll call this customer. Same again. Just simply copy and paste like that, and there you have it. There is our query there. Let's see how that runs. There's our customer ID of 1 and the breakdown per order, and of course we knew for customer 1 it had 125 and 1 as the minimum. As you can see, it's put it here against every single line for customer ID number 1. So you could go down and say, oh, here order ID 65642 had the maximum for the customer, and these 3 here obviously had the minimum. So it's good for some sort of comparison. That is how you can pretty much mix 2 different levels of granularity, one of which we can see that the scope is based on the year being 2016 and broken down by the customer ID, and the next one with the same scope but it's broken down by customer ID and order ID. So we've simply brought the 2 together with an easy CTE or sub-select, whichever way you want to do it. Bring it in your join, and there you have it, off you go. Bring in those 2 columns. That's my preferred method anyway, quick and easy. Of course you've got 2 select statements there, but they're pretty small, pretty swift, only pulling a tiny amount of data. Alrighty then, let's have a look at a scenario for you to get your teeth into. In this one, the warehouse manager is looking to create a new report for his Monday morning briefings with the senior management team. What he's after is a list of all items we have in stock, which bin they are in, as well as the quantity on hand and the latest cost price. He also wants to see the maximum cost price per bin, regardless of which item it belongs to. You therefore need to write a query for him to gather this data. So, looks like we might have a similar scenario to what we've got here, where we might have to do some additional summing at a different group, put in a CTE, and then bring it into our select statement below. So I would say our select statement will take care of this, and maybe the CTE will calculate this bit here. Fancy giving that one a go? If you do, then pause the video and give it a try. And whether you get it or not, when you're ready, we'll go over the answer from my perspective. Alrighty then, let's begin, and what I'll do is I'll start with the main query itself. So it's after a list of all items we have in stock. So we're probably going to be pulling the item name. Let's have a look where that is. Wide World Importers. Let's have a look. Warehouse, stock items. There we have it. Let's have a look at that, and we've got the stock item name. Fantastic. Let's bang that one in. And we're going to pseudonymize that as I for item. Brilliant. So, and he's talking about which bin they're in, quantity on hand, latest cost price. Let's have a look what table that might be in. Groups, transactions, stock item holdings. That's probably the table we're after. So we're going to inner join, drag that one in. There's H. Stock item ID equals I. Stock item ID. Fantastic. Let's have a look at that table. So we've got our quantity on hand, got our bin location, last cost price, etc., etc. So let's bring those into our query. So location, bin location, there we go. And that is of course on the H pseudonym. Don't forget to put those in. Well, there's a quantity on hand and latest cost price. Quantity on hand, latest cost price. There it is. Pure and simple. That's our initial query. Let's give it a go. And there you have it. So that's our query, done and dusted. Very simple, very straightforward. What we've got to do then is to pull the maximum cost price per bin. So if we look at our data again, when we ran it off, we can see we've got bin locations there, L3, there's quite a few in there, and we want the maximum price. So for that it could be 88.5, see the rest at 12. We want to pull the maximum, but we can't group it on any of these here, so we need to group it on the bin location, because if we did a group on the max, and we grouped by the slot here, we'll end up with some very strange results. 1.5, 1.2, it's a bit all over the place because we're grouping by everything that's in there anyway, so the group is irrelevant in this case here. So what we need to do is build in a CTE or a subselect, and we're going to call it max. All we're going to do is select the bin location, let's get those queries written correctly. Last cost price, we want the maximum there. Get rid of our function out of that, and we don't need the group by. From there, from the stock item holdings. So that's the only table we need to actually pull data from, because we want it just from the bin location within that table. What have we forgotten? That's right, you got me straight away. We need the group by in there. So for every group, every bin location, we just want to pull the maximum cost price there. And there you go. So there's our bins, all of which are unique. And there's the one max price for all of them. So now we've got our max. We simply on m.bin location equals h dot bin location, and that's all you need to do to join them together. And we need to bring in our max price there, and there you go, we have our query for you there. Let's run that off. We know that our CTE works, so it doesn't matter what the item is, it doesn't matter the quantity or the cost price, we're simply pulling the max price, which is $8.50. As you can see there, K2 is $8.50, so it puts it up there against every single row in the table. Going down to the next one, D1, the maximum max price for that entire bin, regardless of what's in it, is $59. As you can see, it isn't sorted, so we may need to have a quick sort by bin location. So those ones, there's only one bin holding those, but for D1, 59, here's your 59 in D1. So we know that our query is working. So that's one simple way to get a aggregate based off a set of items. However, your actual select, you can see, is got a lot of additional columns that we don't want to get confused with. We just wanted the bin location, so that is our scope, as it were. Get the max price for each bin location, so we couldn't include a max within our select statement here, because our scope would have been all of these columns here. So that's just one thing to think about when you're putting in these sort of aggregate functions, is what scope that you need to consider when running off your queries. So how did you go with that? If you got something similar to me, got the same results, fantastic stuff. Remember, I tend to use CTEs for this sort of work. It's quite easy, neat to write. However, you could have used sub-selects within your joins or even within your column itself. Up to you how you wanted to do that. Okay, so I'm gonna call it a day on this specific video. We've covered quite a lot about the aggregate functions, covering mainly the min and max, but we've looked at a bit of the theory behind it all. So in the next video, within part 1, we're going to look at a few more aggregate functions and how they're used and how we can use them in our SQL code. Until then, everyone, I wish you all a fantastic day.